Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we are going to be working on this BMW. I believe it's 2013. The customer's complaint is that the low oil pressure or a loss of oil pressure error message keeps popping up while he's driving. It doesn't do it all the time, but extended driving, it'll pop up. Now sometimes it'll come on shorter than that, but he's tried a lot of things on his own. This is a regular customer, not a car lot, and is just in need of a little bit higher diagnostics, and so that's why he brought it here. Personally, I haven't dealt with too many low oil pressure messages coming on other than the simple bad oil pressure switch. This one is a little bit of a different setup. As far as the engine, it's the four-cylinder N20, and this particular one has a control valve that regulates oil pressure that the engine computer controls. And so it doesn't just rely on the oil pump to create and maintain pressure. It actually has kind of like, let's call it a dump valve that will regulate the oil pressure. As far as trouble codes, it did have some codes related to oil pressure, and one of them was actually related to that control valve. I believe it was even like a circuit code or something. Now, me personally, again, not dealt with this and never seen that code before, but I do have plenty of spare N20 cores, and so I robbed one of those control valves. It's easy enough to do and replace. So I opted and chose to replace a valve and then recheck it to see if it comes back. But to no avail, there's still a problem. Oil error message still pops up. So I've decided to look at it in a little bit more detail, and I'm going to bring you guys along as to what I want to look at and why, and see what we find. All right, so I just scanned it and it's got some codes. Now this is related to a test ride that I did after replacing that solenoid valve. So let's see what's in the DME, just to get you a shot of that. Okay, so this is a list of the codes. This one I don't pay any attention to. I think it's the default to cut boost. So we won't worry about that. These Vanos codes, I am not going to worry about right now either, because of having oil pressure problems, and we all know variable timing is dependent upon oil pressure. Obviously, we have these are related to oil pressure. It's telling us that the obviously pressure is too low, but it's thinking that that oil pressure control valve that I was talking about is jamming up in the, I guess, fully energized position, which would then equal minimum oil pressure. And then obviously engine oil pump pressure too low. Trouble code, as far as that valve, let me get you a shot. It's basically kind of like a Vanos solenoid, or just variable timing control solenoid valve. It's a 2-pin, pretty straightforward. And the way this operates, in its closed position, it goes to the default max oil pressure, which is 80 psi. Basically, it's when it's de-energized, when the DME is not pulsing it, not controlling it, it goes to a fully closed position for a safety measure, or to just provide max oil pressure. And then during its operation, it should be between 22 and 65. I'm assuming this is probably closer to, at idle, and then in driving range, it should probably be being controlled in that to achieve that amount of PSI. So if the DME is logging this code, now you remember over there we wrote fully closed as max pressure. Here it thinks it's jamming in the full energized, meaning full open, which would drop the oil pressure. And all of that is monitored by its own oil pressure sensor. But we know that trouble code is not caused to a valve because we've replaced the valve. So what I'm going to do and what I want to watch is tap in to my oil pressure monitoring standalone-ish off of the car, and I'm going to watch the duty control of that solenoid valve, and I want to see if I can let it warm up enough to where oil pressure starts to, I guess, fall off, or it just drops out, or what. And I want to see what that control valve does when that happens. And so I've got this scope going. I'm all set up, tapped in. I'm going to start the car, and I'm actually going to pull up the live data here and just see what the car is seeing as far as oil pressure also. Okay, so we definitely have duty control. There's our oil pressure. This is close to 40 up here, and now we're going to stabilize. So right now it's 9:30. Let's see how long we're going to let it run to see if we get anything to happen. Okay, so it's only been a couple minutes, and I pulled up the PID. Car is reading 36, but on my reading here, I am at 23. So that's a little bit discrepancy. We have to keep an eye on that, but again, we'll just let it idle, see if if it takes a while. But I want to get that oil pressure to drop. Okay, so it's now 9:48. We're still maintaining each pressure sensor's corresponding reading. Again, a little bit off from each other, but nonetheless, the pump, the control valve, the system, everything is still maintaining at that level. Again, we'll keep letting it idle, see if we can get to the point of where it'll drop out. Okay, so not too much longer after that, we actually ended up dropping about 10 psi. So it's definitely dropping and holding, even though it looks like it's getting lower than what needs to be. Still no error message. But we know we are lower than what we had started. Again, need to figure out if this one's off or if mine's off, because if we go by the spec, running is minimum at 22 psi. According to this, that's still within that window. According to this one, we are way below that. So let's I'm gonna keep an eye on it and see when that light comes on. Okay, so I just caught it. Let's see. Okay, almost 10 o'clock. If you see this, we cut out duty control. Oil pressure did something funky. I'm still in the 1123. Over here we are still in the let's see, 24. Let's go check to see. Let's see, doors open, but I believe that is when normally, I think at this point we would have gotten the message. Let's see. So I'm looking for a message, and I just went into the service center, and we are, at least it's telling us correct oil level. So that doesn't seem to be a problem. The customer did change the oil, correct oil, factory filter, and all that. He measured it out. I know it's not a level thing or a quality of oil thing, but oddly enough, we're still not getting the error message. But I'm gonna stop the scope, and since we saw something occur there, I'm gonna try and analyze that. Okay, guys. So quickly, just wanted to explain what the scope capture is telling us or showing us. Main thing again as to why I'm going as far as why I'm going and why I am scoping as to what I am scoping is to try to verify if we need to go deep into opening up the engine, or if we can find out if there is some sort of, let's call it external or electrical issue or DME issue with the control factor not being correct, being that we do have many variables that contribute to controlling the oil pressure. Not only do we have an oil pump that I'm sure has a relief valve, but we do have a control valve that dictates the oil pressure that is controlled by the DME. So before determining that there is a mechanical issue or so on and so forth, I wanted to check and see what was going on electrically while monitoring the oil pressure. This is one of the captures. I took many of them. Not sure if this is the same one that was on the video. For some reason, I did not save any of these scope captures, but I did take pictures because I was updating the customer, and this is one of the ones that I sent him via email to let him know what was going on. If we take a look, this is one of the points where basically an error message comes up, and we can see a big change from this beginning portion of the waveform as opposed to towards here in the end. This big blue blob that was being continuously seen is the control valve, the oil control valve being duty cycled by the DME. I wanted to particularly pay attention to see if we were going to lose control via the DME to maybe see if we had a DME issue. We know it wasn't the oil control valve because it was a separate new or different valve that was installed, and we still had the same issue and error message. So I was wanting to see if we were losing DME control. At the same time, like I explained, we monitored oil pressure. If you look here, this whole portion where it's a big solid blue, based off of our time base that we are capturing, it looks like a big solid blob, but it's because it's just bunched up. And if you were to be able to open it up, you can see the square wave for duty cycle, which on oil pressure level in PSI, you can tell that we held it constant while it's being controlled. And clearly we see that the control goes away and our voltage stays up high. When that occurred, you can see that something happened with our oil pressure level. It went from being constant to having some, I'm going to say, erratic level changes. Not too drastic, but there were some changes going on. What ended up happening here, and this can be misconstrued as a faulty DME. Obviously, we lose control of the oil control valve at this point, and you can think that the DME just goes into faulted state or stops being able to control it and make a wrong call and say that the DME is being the cause of this low oil pressure issue because it stops being able to control the valve. But if you remember that a default for the valve is to go to full oil pressure feed in the default, and so even if the DME was bad, mechanically the oil control valve would supply more than enough oil pressure, other than low oil pressure reading that we are actually capturing. So what is going on here is the oil pressure gets to such a low point, even though it's being controlled, that the DME is not happy and turns kind of like a cell, and turns into almost a fail-safe mode and shuts off control and command of the valve, which then mechanically should shoot up the pressure. And we do see that happen. So we shut off control because the DME goes kind of into safety mode, because at this point the pressure was already way too low for the DME's happiness, that it cuts off control of the valve, and you can see that the pressure, it actually shoots up and rises, and then past that point, still with no control, which now we are mechanically shooting as much oil pressure that we can feed, because the oil control valve is in its full range to feed as much pressure as we can based off of those specs that I read to you earlier. But even then, it cannot hold and maintain high oil pressure, and it still ends up dropping off to a way lower point than even the fail-safe point was when the DME started to basically shut off control. But this here tells me DME is not the cause. And again, you can think that the DME driver failed or something and stopped controlling the valve, and then you can maybe relate that to an error message on the dash. But what really actually happened is the DME saw the lower than normal oil pressure while being constant and pulsed with controlled, and couldn't reach a specified point. So it shuts it off because it wants to reach full mechanical feed as far as oil pressure, and the oil pressure does jump up, but it's still not high enough, and it ends up dropping off, and it actually levels out, and we are still very, very low in oil pressure. So this tells me that we have some sort of mechanical issue, and it is not related to the control valve, it's not related to the DME, and so on and so forth. And we are just verifying that we physically have low oil pressure because of a mechanical issue. Okay, so after seeing everything we did on the scope and how the oil pressure after some time dropped, of course, with some heat, I don't want to do anything crazy or drastic as far as making some sort of heavy work call. I opted to basically drop the oil. I looked at it, it didn't look crazy, but I'm going to go ahead and start off with the correct amount with the factory oil and see if that changes. Obviously a new filter. I inspected his. It is an original filter and nothing crazy. Oil didn't look terrible, obviously, because it actually had just been done, and hit the level that he had it at, the customer, was actually correct. I didn't show, or I forgot to mention, when it was running, the oil level display in the car was right at the correct level. So I know it's not a level or amount issue. So we're gonna see if it's an oil type issue before doing anything crazy. Okay, so the oil's complete, it's in there. Gonna go ahead, start it, and let it run for a while. and I've got the scanner connected to monitor the oil pressure. Alright, so from there we'll just let it warm up and see what it does. Okay, so I just backed it off the lift, and I'm actually going to go ahead and drive it and get it hot and warm. It's pretty hot out today here in town, so hopefully I can get it really up to a good temperature to see if this oil will be affected. So off to test drive it, and I will get you back with the results. Okay, so I just got back. Naturally, the check engine light and drivetrain malfunction message also came up. If I hold it here at idle, it gets closer down to 15 on the scanner here, and it starts to make some clacking noise. Okay guys, so I didn't show much of the procedure, but basically we ended up doing timing and cleaning up the oil pan and spraying down a lot of the components. So all fresh new guides, chain, tensioner, oil pump chain, everything. We cleaned up the oil pickup, and we've let this run at least half hour, so half hour 45 minutes in the shop while we worked on another car. And this is where the oil pressure currently is after running for that long. I've just pulled out of the shop. I'm gonna go for a test drive, but I think by now that at least half hour 45 minutes, the light beforehand would have definitely came on. Let me show you. So we've been running for a while, and it's holding steady good. So obviously it's blatant that there was a blockage that's going to restrict the oil pressure and oil flow, and so most likely it's going to be okay. I do have an oil change coming after this. I'm going to kind of flush the engine out with the oil I've got in it now, and then again I'll put the proper oil in after a few miles of this oil. But that's it. I'll continue on with the test drive and catch you guys up.